Do you want to know exactly which wide receivers should be in your lineup and who should be on your bench for Week 12? We're about to tell you. Welcome back to the Fantasy Endgame. I'm Pierre. He's Chris. We're going to talk about wide receivers for every matchup in Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Of course, it's Thanksgiving week, so we have no teams on bye, and we have 3 games on Thursday. We're going to help you set those lineups ahead of time to pull out another victory. First, let's get to the wide receivers you don't have to worry about. These are must starts regardless. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, T. Higgins, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Mike Evans. All right, let's start with the first game of the week. That would be the early Thursday matchup between the Buffalo Bills and the Detroit Lions. Thanksgiving tradition, Detroit is on TV. But let's start with the Buffalo side. You're starting Diggs. What about Gabe Davis? Seems like a potential feast for him against this Lions defense.
Yeah, I know last week told everybody you got to roll with Gabe Davis. It's a good matchup. Didn't go off, but at least he had a nice floor in that game against the Lions. You got to roll with him again. He once again has huge week winning upside. Can't leave that on my bench. I got to start Gabe Davis.
And while you think this Detroit defense has looked a little bit better these days, they actually managed to pull out a win against the Giants. But look, they just gave up a 100-yard game to Wan'Dale Robinson and a decent chunk of yardage to Darius Slayton. I'm feeling good about Gabe Davis. I am starting him for sure, unless I happen to have several stud receivers ahead of him. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, kind of always on that cusp. You feel like you have to start him against Buffalo. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I mean, not the best matchup, of course, but still, he's got such a high floor. I think, I don't know how you really bench him. I think you got to start him.
I think you have to start him, especially if you assume Buffalo can put up points against Detroit, which I think they can. We're going to see a lot more passing from Detroit than we did last week. I feel like you have to put the Sun God in your lineup. And then the Giants will take on the Cowboys. Just mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson. Sadly, he is out for the season towards ACL after having his best game of the year. So that kind of just leaves Darius Slayton. He's definitely the number one receiver there now. Does that mean he's someone we should have more interest in for fantasy?
Not this week. This is a tough matchup. I mean, yeah, I know he's the only guy they really have, but still, in this brutal matchup, I got to sit Darius Slayton this week.
I mean, I feel like the target share means he is viable. Again, with no teams on bye, you're going to have a lot more options than usual. I feel like Slayton is still flex worthy because he's going to get targeted. He can make plays down the field. I don't feel great about him in this matchup. But look, we know at least Trevon Diggs is beatable, right? He's going to take some chances. So I am okay with Slayton if you need him. And then on the other hand, look, we know Lamb has been great. Gallup just hasn't. I mean, he's just kind of barely been there. Does he have any viability here against the Giants?
This is a tough secondary. Not starting Gallup either. Just haven't seen enough from him. On my bench, can't start him.
Yeah, I mean, I really think at this point he's become droppable. He's getting like 3-4 catches a game. No touchdowns, no big plays. I still think we're going to have to wait till next year to see him, become somebody we want to have on our roster in fantasy. Patriots at the Vikings. Really the only receiver worth talking about in New England is Jacoby Myers. How do you think he can do against Minnesota?
Very well. This is a great matchup against his secondary. Not a must start. I'll never consider Jacoby Myers a must start, but in this matchup, I think he's a good start.
Yeah, you figure New England will do what they usually do, especially against Minnesota. In Minnesota, control the ground game, try to milk the clock and not take too many chances. But Myers always gets a ton of targets. He's always kind of on that wide receiver 3 radar. So I think he's an okay start this week. And then on the other hand, well, let's hope Justin Jefferson bounces back. But regardless, you should not be worried about him. What about Adam Thielen, though? He really has not stepped up.
No, and this is a tough matchup, tough defense. Not starting Adam Thielen.
I'm definitely not starting Adam Thielen or KJ Osborne or anybody else. I'm worried enough about JJ this week. I'm definitely not starting any of those other receivers in Minnesota. Broncos will take on the Panthers. It's the same old Russ. But look, we got Courtland Sutton in the mix. He's the lead guy there. Do you think he could do anything against Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a really high floor. He doesn't have much of a ceiling because he's probably not going to score a touchdown. This is another great matchup for him. Not a must start, but with the floor he has, I think he's a good start.
Yeah, definitely not as good a matchup as last week. But again, he's at least the lead guy there. He's startable. Again, I can't go crazy about him. But look, there are worse options. He's a good player. He's going to get targeted. I think he's startable as kind of a low-end wide receiver 3. And then Jerry Jeudy did not play last week. Might come back this week with that ankle issue. We'll see. If he does play, do you start him?
I don't know. I think I'd want to see a game first with him healthy in this offense, before I can trust him. So I think I'm going to sit him this week and see how he does.
Yeah, I'm sitting him. It's hard to feel really great about anybody in Denver these days. And so with health being a question, I'll just pass. And then on the Carolina side, well, is Terrace Marshall now the wide receiver 1 in Carolina? And if so, does that make you at all interested in him?
No, no. It's either going to be Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold. I want no part of this offense not starting Terrace Marshall.
No, I didn't think so. I mean, he's had decent matchups the last couple of weeks, but let's remember, Denver limits wide receivers to the fewest fantasy points per game. It's going to be Baker Mayfield or Sam Darnold. No to Terrace Marshall, and I think it's probably even harder no to DJ Moore this week.
Yeah, hard no to DJ Moore.
Bucs at the Browns. What about Chris Godwin? A week off, do you think that, helps him in any way? Maybe he'll be a little more spry this week?
Yeah, I mean, like he's another guy. I feel like you got him, you put him in your lineup. You're going to get a nice, safe floor from him. If he scores, you get like a decent ceiling. Not a huge ceiling, but a decent ceiling. So if you got Godwin, you're starting him.
It's a good matchup for him. Look, maybe the week of rest did him well. And this offense is slowly coming together. Again, hard to sit him. So I feel like he's a pretty solid start this week. And then I think we have to mention Julio Jones. Do you think that he could do something against Cleveland?
I mean, he's always got a chance to do something, but I'm not betting on it. I'm not starting Julio Jones.
No, neither am I. Sorry. He's a desperation start only, and this week you shouldn't need to be playing guys out of desperation. And then on the other side, well, we got Amari Cooper, who, proved us wrong. That whole split thing, throw it out the window. Matchups, doesn't matter. So, going against Tampa Bay, this is a home game for him. Do you feel like we have to start Amari Cooper?
I guess so. I mean, it's a tough matchup, but it's at home. It's Amari Cooper. He can always boom. I think he's just one of these guys, like, he's kind of like the, Aaron Jones or Miles Sanders of wide receivers. You just have to start him and take what you get because the upside is too huge. So you got to start Amari Cooper.
The most ironic thing would be if now he just completely busts and let down because he's at home, just to prove everyone wrong again. But yeah, you have to keep him in your lineup. I think he's proved that it's just not worth benching him. So go ahead, start Amari Cooper everywhere you got him. Donovan Peoples-Jones, do you think that he could do something against Tampa?
I mean, it's hard to say no because he's been so good lately, but it's also a tough matchup. I can't say he's a must start. I'm going to say if you need him, you can start him.
I could see a path because, again, when you look at Tampa Bay, pretty good pass defense, but really, really good run defense. Maybe Nick Chubb gets shut down again. Maybe they have to pass it a lot again. But still, I think Peoples-Jones is still always just kind of a flex-only option. And again, with no teams on bye, you probably have some players with more upside. So I would only start him if you really don't have anybody better. Ravens taking on the Jaguars. Well, now all of a sudden we have to talk about Demarcus Robinson because he was clearly far and away the number one receiver last week. Got a ton of passes, ton of targets. The number one receiver for Baltimore. Is this the start of something or you think it's just a fluke?
I mean, there's a big part of me that thinks it's a fluke, but this is a good matchup. They really don't have anybody else. It's like him and Mark Andrews, and that's pretty much it. So I can't say he's a must start or even a good start. I'm going to say another guy just because of the matchup. If you need him, you can start him.
I will say that at the very least, it's worth finding out. Look, again, out of all these guys who are always like kind of that flex option with upside, I would take him over like a DPJ or like a Terrace Marshall or some of these other guys that we might mention that you don't know what you're going to get. it's worth finding out if maybe this is something that is building, a relationship that he trusts him as the number one guy. So I think you can start him if you need a flex. And then Christian Kirk, speaking of unpredictable, which Christian Kirk are we going to get this week?
It should be a good one because it's a great matchup against this Ravens secondary. I think if you have Christian Kirk, you start him this week.
Yeah, I mean, the upside is so great. You hate to bench him unless you really, really feel down about him, and I don't in this matchup, so I'll say yes to Christian Kirk for sure. Well, what about Zay Jones? Can he do something as well?
I mean, he's another one of these guys that can do something but may not do something. It's a good matchup. If you need him, you can start him.
Yeah, I don't feel like you should need him this week. Again, he's one of those guys that's only like plug if you really have to. So, no, I'll pass on Zay Jones this week. Texans going to take on the Dolphins. Start with Brandon Cooks. Sort of coming back to relevance, but still not living up to what we expected. Do you think he could do something against Miami, which has been definitely vulnerable to the passing game this year?
Again, like Julio, like Zay Jones, can he do something? Yes. Will he do something? Probably not. It is a good matchup. So again, I'm going to say because of the matchup, if you need him, you can start him.
I mean, I put him ahead of those guys. At least he's the number one option in his offense. Granted, that offense looked completely terrible last week and most of the year. So, but I'd say he's on, the flex radar at least. I think you can start him if you need to. Nico Collins hasn't quite taken that next step and broken out. Do you expect anything better this week?
No, it's same. If you need him, you can start him. Desperation kind of flex play.
Yeah, again, desperation only. Agree there. I'm going to pass on him this week. Bears going to travel to take on the Jets. The big question here is who's going to be quarterback for Chicago? Is it going to be Justin Fields or Trevor Siemian? I imagine that's going to go a long way to deciding whether you want to take a chance on Darnell Mooney or you just don't take a chance on him at all because there is Sauce Gardner waiting on the other side.
Yeah, either a banged up Fields or Trevor Siemian against the Jets. I'm going to sit Darnell Mooney.
Yeah, I think just don't even worry about it. Not like Mooney's been going off lately anyways in this situation. Really good pass defense for the Jets. Just forget about Mooney. And I'd like to say we could just forget about the Jets pass offense completely. We don't know who's going to be quarterback there either. A very vague, kind of worrisome press conference where we don't know if Zach Wilson will be the quarterback, and that's probably a good thing if he isn't. But what do you do with Garrett Wilson at this point?
I mean, the Bears honestly are not a good matchup for wide receivers. They're much worse against the run. Teams just don't throw on them a lot. Unless it's Joe Flacco and, the Jets are going to magically throw it 40 times again like they were earlier in the year, I think you got to sit Garrett Wilson this week.
I'll just go ahead and say if Zach Wilson's still the quarterback, I'm not starting any Jets receiver. If Joe Flacco does come back, I think Garrett Wilson this week is startable. Bengals going to take on the Titans. Well, no Jamar Chase yet. T. Higgins, you have to start. Tyler Boyd is where this week?
Who knows? I mean, this is another great matchup against this, a team that's much better against the run than the pass. But we had this last week, and he disappointed so badly. So I'm only going to put Tyler Boyd in the start him if you need him category because of the matchup.
I mean, Boyd's another one of these guys that only seems to go off when you don't expect it. I really thought he was going to have a big game last week, and instead, for some reason, Joe Burrow only had eyes for T. Higgins and Samaje Perine. Go figure. He should be a good start this week, which means he'll probably do nothing. But look, on paper, I'd say I'll trust the matchup, and I say he's at least somebody you can consider as a flex option with upside. Now, on the other hand, we got Treylon Burks, who had, I think, his breakout performance. We can say that over 100 yards last week. Does he keep it going against the Bengals?
Maybe, but it's a tough matchup. I don't know. I'm not ready to put him in my lineup quite yet in this matchup. Let me see it one more time. I'm going to sit him this week.
Well, I won't say outright sit because, again, Bengals tough against the run. They might have to pass to keep up with Cincinnati. So I think he is startable, but only at the flex and only if your other options don't have more upside. But I'm a fan of Burks, so I think there's at least some potential here. Robert Woods, I can't say I feel as good about him. In this case, I'll probably just say I'll sit him.
Yeah, hard pass on Robert Woods.
Falcons at the Commanders. Drake London scored again and somehow came up with as few yards as possible while doing it. I mean, it's such a weird thing. Let's just say this. Do you think that with Kyle Pitts now out, he benefits in any way?
I mean, maybe he benefits in the sense that he gets more targets, but are those targets going to be catchable? Probably not. I mean, this guy, it's not even touchdown or bust. It's like touchdown or you get nothing. So, like, not starting Drake London.
No, again, don't get carried away. It's hard to imagine a guy like that could catch a touchdown and come away with 7 fantasy points or whatever it was. So, no, he's still not startable unless there's a quarterback change, and that's probably going to happen next year. And on the other side, well, Terry McLaurin didn't go off last week. Does he do better this week? Because it is Atlanta.
Yeah, it's the Falcons. Get players in there against the Falcons if you can. You're starting Terry McLaurin this week.
You have to start Terry McLaurin. Probably a week early on the boom prediction. This week is probably when he goes nuts because it's the Atlanta pass defense. I think you have to start Scary Terry. Curtis Samuel did score. Is he also a must start based on the matchup?
I can't go as far as to call him a must start, but again, it's such a good matchup. Curtis Samuel is at least a good start this week.
I think he's proven to be a pretty solid option, kind of coming back to life. So, yeah, you can't go too far with him, but definitely a good matchup. So, I'll say he's a solid start in most leagues this week. Jahan Dotson, are we going to go that far?
I mean, this defense is bad, but I don't know if it's that bad. I'm not ready to start Jahan Dotson. I'm sitting him.
Yeah, didn't get quite the target share you'd want to see. Still doesn't really have that connection with Taylor Heineke because remember, when he was playing earlier in the year, it was Carson Wentz. He's pretty much touchdown or bust. So I'll say I will sit Dotson. Now, the Chargers going to take on the Cardinals. We're going to talk about a lot of receivers here, and there's a lot of what ifs we don't know. So let's start with Mike Williams. I mean, talk about a disappointment because he was all ready to go. He thought he was 200% ready, and apparently not because he caught one pass and then exited for the rest of the night. If Mike Williams does come back for Week 12, can you trust him?
No, you can't trust him. You got to see him get through a game healthy first. I don't even care about the matchup. Need to see him healthy, not starting him.
Nope. And somehow Keenan Allen made it through the game, but Mike Williams didn't. That's not at all what we expected, of course. So, yeah, I agree. Just don't take the chance here. Sit Mike Williams. Keenan Allen, on the other hand, can you trust him now because he's going to be the number one guy? Well, unless it's Josh Palmer again. But how do you feel about Keenan Allen?
I think you got to feel pretty good about Keenan Allen. We know he's got a high floor, so I think if you got Keenan Allen, you start him.
Agree, especially if Williams is out. I feel like he's almost a must-start these days. And then Josh Palmer, of course, just as with the other two starting receivers come back, Palmer not only had his best game of the year, but was the leading target in that game on Sunday night. Is Palmer now a guy you just have to keep in there?
I mean, it's not nearly as good of a matchup. But I think if Mike Williams is out, Palmer's still a good start because, you know, Keenan Allen is kind of the slot guy now. That's all he really does. That's all really he's ever done, I guess. So I think if Mike Williams is out, Palmer's a good start.
Yeah, I won't go so far as to say must start. Can't overreact to last week. But obviously he's still going to be involved regardless of whether those guys play. So definitely a solid start. I might put him up to the wide receiver 3 range now. All right, and then we got DeAndre Hopkins. I feel like if he plays, you have to start him.
Yeah, I think if you got DeAndre Hopkins, you're starting him.
And then mentioned Hollywood. Obviously didn't play in Mexico. Should be back Week 12. But again, how involved is he going to be? And do you just throw him back in your lineup?
Yeah, I can't throw him back in my lineup. First game back from IR off a foot injury. Let me see it first. I learned my lesson with Mike Williams. Let me see it first. Let me see him get healthy and through the game. Then I'll consider starting him. I'm not starting him this week.
And of course, the question of how many targets does he get? With Hopkins in there now, we didn't see them together early in the season. So risky. I mean, I hate to sit him outright, but again, it's going to be a risk-reward thing. You got to see who else you have and whether you really want to shoot for the ceiling. But yeah, very risky, I think, flex play. Raiders taking on the Seahawks. I mean, this pass offense is just all Devontae Adams. But look, Mac Hollins at least somewhat involved. Does he have any fantasy juice against Seattle?
I mean, maybe, but like you said, there's nobody on bye this week. You shouldn't have to rely on Mac Hollins. I'm not starting Mac Hollins.
Nah, it's a flex if needed, but the upside just isn't there like it was before. Even with Renfrow and Waller on IR, Hollins just kind of is what he is, and that's just a flex play at best. Now, DK Metcalf, on the other hand, gets to play this Raiders defense, which is one of the worst against quarterbacks and receivers. Is he a must start?
I can't go as far as to say must start, but in this matchup, he's a very good start.
Well, I'll go that far. If I have DK Metcalf, I'm definitely starting him. I feel like he could be due for a big game. And you know what? I'm going to say the same thing with Tyler Lockett. I feel like he's a guy I have to have in there. I'm not going to miss out on the potential for a monster game.
Yeah, Lockett has monster game potential here. Another very good start.
Rams at the Chiefs. Oh, this sounded so good on paper before the season started, but it's probably going to be a blowout. Look, Matt Stafford, we don't even know if he's going to play. So just when you thought Allen Robinson looked like he might be paying off for you, I don't know. I mean, can you trust Allen Robinson if it's not Stafford at QB?
No, only if it's Stafford. If it's Stafford, then I think Allen Robinson is actually a decent start this week because it's the Chiefs. This secondary is vulnerable, but only if it's Matt Stafford.
Yeah, agree. If Stafford plays, which I'm very skeptical about, then you can start Robinson, but otherwise you just have to abandon ship on this whole offense. Now the Chiefs did like a rotating carousel here of who's playing in and who isn't at receiver. Okay, so let's start with Juju, who should be back. If he's back in there, do you plug and play against the Rams?
I think you do. It's a tough matchup, but Juju's not gonna get shadowed by Jalen Ramsey or anything because he plays predominantly out of the slot. So yeah, I think if Juju's back, you play him.
I agree. I'm definitely playing Juju if he's back. And remember, this Rams team is just down and out, but also we just saw Chris Olave go for over 100 yards there with Andy Dalton at quarterback. I'm not too worried about these receivers. I'm definitely playing Juju. I wish we could say the same about Kadarius Toney, but we saw what happened. Didn't even do anything before leaving with an ankle injury. Okay, so if he plays, are you taking the risk?
No, I'm done with Toney. I don't know what I was thinking. I was so off this guy before the draft, after the draft, all last season, all this season, and then I got sucked in by this, the Chiefs. And no, this guy, no, done. Done with Kadarius Toney. Never starting him again. Never recommending you start him again. Done with him.
It's funny because everyone talks about, he's like a video game player, breaking ankles. Except the problem is he's breaking his own ankle. Like, look, I cannot trust this guy. We were sucked in last week. I'm not doing it either, so I'm not taking the chance. What about MVS? Because look, if Toney doesn't play and we know Hardman's still on IR, any hope for MVS?
No, I mean, it didn't even help him out. Like, no Juju. Toney, 10 snaps, and then he's out of the game. And MVS still doesn't do anything. Never starting MVS, no.
The same thing. I will never recommend MVS. It doesn't really matter what's going on in the offense. And I feel like we have to mention Justin Watson because, I mentioned Justin Watson last week, and he did put up some points. I mean, no Toney. Does Watson take on maybe even a bigger role?
I mean, only if Juju is also out. I think if Juju is back, you got to be super desperate. You shouldn't be that desperate this week, so I'm going to say no.
Yeah, and that's what I kept warning people. Desperation only. Look, he did get you a few points, but if you benched Amari Cooper in favor of Justin Watson, you weren't too happy. So he's startable, but again, that would be only in really deep leagues. Saints against the 49ers. Chris Olave had one of those big games. Can he do it again against San Fran?
I mean, Chris Olave is becoming one of those guys that, like Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis, you don't want to miss out on the boom, right? Like, he could, the previous 3 weeks didn't really do a lot. People stop starting him, and then he booms, and you missed out. So, this isn't like the worst defense as far as wide receivers go. I think I'm starting Chris Olave in most spots.
Agree. Again, going to be boom bust, but the potential is always there for big games, so you hate to miss out. I'll say Olave is a solid start, as he is every week. What about Jarvis Landry? He did find the end zone and was targeted a couple times in the red zone. Does that make you interested in him?
Not really. I mean, maybe he'll score again, but he's not going to put up a ton of yards. He's not going to catch a ton of passes. Just not the guy I like having in my lineup. I'm not starting him.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this isn't necessarily bound to be a high-scoring game. Landry is startable, but again, more of a floor play, so you could probably do better. Now on the 49ers side, there's Debo, who has not been Debo of last year, but it's so hard to keep him on the bench, isn't it?
Yeah, but not a must-start for me by any stretch anymore. This is a good matchup, but still, like the way he's being used in this offense, just, very, very limited. So I can only put Debo Samuel as a stardom if you need him.
I mean, it would have to be a really shallow league for me to bench Debo, and the Saints defense has just not been good this year. So I'll say you pretty much have to start Debo and then just see what you get. And then Brandon Ayuk, again, I'm just going to say, I think he's been solid all season. He hasn't really faded based on what's been going on around him with the other skill players. I think he's definitely a solid start against New Orleans.
Yeah, I like Ayuk more because I like the way he's using this offense more down the field. He doesn't need, tons of yards after catch. He doesn't need incredible volume. So I like Ayuk more than Devo, actually. I think he's a solid start as well.
Let's talk Packers-Eagles. Christian Watson, we know what he's done in the last couple of weeks. Could he do it again, this time in Philly?
I mean, this is the thing. Like, are you going to stick your neck on the line and say, no, he can't sustain this, and then he does it again, and then you look like an idiot? Or are you going to, say, yes, he can, and then he does it, and you look like an idiot that way? So I guess either way, you're going to look like an idiot. But I don't know. This is a Darius Slay, Christian Watson. All he does is catch touchdowns, doesn't do anything outside of that. I'm not going to say you have to sit him, but, man, more like a desperation flex for me this week.
Exactly. You almost feel like you have to start him. 5 touchdowns the last 2 weeks? We know that's not going to continue every week, but are you really taking that chance? So, I mean, again, it kind of put him right there in that territory with a Chris Olave, Gabe Davis type. I would prefer those other two guys over him. Don't get me wrong. I'm not putting him quite that high yet, but he's also so hard to sit. So I'll say I'll put him as a flex possibility depending on who else you have. And then what about Allen Lazard?
Yeah, this isn't a good matchup for him. He's more of a floor play, so I'm going to say this week I'll sit Allen Lazard.
I agree. Going to sit Allen Lazard. On paper, not a good matchup. I feel like the upside isn't as high as with Watson, so not starting Lazard if I can help it. What about Devontae Smith now? Was the leading receiver for this team a week ago. Do you think that he builds on that?
Maybe, maybe not. He's right there for me with Chris Olave, Gabe Davis, even kind of like Christian Kirk. These guys that, they can boom, but they can also bust, but you don't really want them to be on your bench. Packers, they have a good secondary, but not like a complete shutdown secondary. So I think Devonta Smith, once again, is a good start.
Yep. Again, not ever sure what you're going to get from him. The big play is always in store, potentially. So solid flex play, but I can't ever say you have to start him. And the week ends with the Steelers at the Colts. George Pickens had a nice game, a couple weeks in a row with a touchdown. Is he trending towards must-start territory?
Definitely not must-start. This is another tough matchup. I know he had a tough matchup last week and did pretty well. But still, he's still got Kenny Pickett. This isn't a smash spot. I think if you need him, you can start him.
I mean, he's definitely got upside, but agree, not ever going to be a guy you. So you have to start. We still haven't seen really this big step forward from Kenny Pickett. So they're getting there. But yeah, Pickens is still just a flex option. A good one, but not a absolute must start. And then Deontay Johnson, I'm not seeing it. I don't feel like you can start him.
Yeah, it's so weird. No connection with Pickett at all or something. I don't know, but you cannot start Deontay Johnson.
Now, Michael Pittman, on the other hand, slowly coming back to life. The Steelers secondary has given up quite a bit of yards to wide receivers. How strongly do you feel about Pittman?
I feel very good about Pittman. This is a great matchup. I mean, we were really down on them last week against the Eagles, and he came through. This is a way better matchup. I think you start Michael Pittman.
Yeah, he's a strong start. I wish the touchdowns were coming and that we saw some more involvement. They're still going to go JT in the red zone for the most part. But maybe this is the week, so I feel like he's a really good start. And then let's end with Paris Campbell. I know some people really encouraged by his usage. How encouraged are you?
Yeah, he's fine. This is a much better matchup than last week. Not going to say like a must start or a strong start, but he's a good start if you need him.
In the flex conversation, but again, more of a floor play than a ceiling guy. I don't feel like there's a huge game coming now or really ever. But yeah, I mean, if you need a few points, he's definitely on the radar. All right, now you know how we feel about all the wide receivers that matter for Week 12. Don't forget, we have you covered. Running back, quarterback, tight end, trade advice, waiver wire, everything you need to win in fantasy football in our playlist right here.